All right, so I want you to picture this for a second. It's November 20th, 2018. We're in Monmouth County, New Jersey.
This is horse country.
Exactly. It's wealthy, it's quiet. We are talking about the kind of place where, the biggest drama in the neighborhood is usually something about property lines or
maybe a zoning dispute for a new barn. That's about the level of it.
and it's 2 days before Thanksgiving. People are getting ready for the holiday. Kids are about to be off from school. It's a very normal, suburban, affluent scene.
It's the last place on earth you expect a massacre. And that is exactly what we are talking about today. But, it didn't start as a massacre investigation. It started as a fire.
Or rather, 2 fires.
2 fires, yeah.
This is what the local press immediately started calling the tale of 2 fires. So at 12:38 in the afternoon, a mansion in Colts Neck, a huge place belonging to a man named Keith Caneiro, is reported to be on fire.
A huge fire. You can see the smoke for miles.
But, and this is the key, earlier that same morning at 5:01 a.m., another fire had been reported. This one is about 10 miles away in a town called Ocean Township.
And the owner of that house.
Paul Caneiro, Keith's older brother.
So, 2 brothers, 2 house fires, same morning.
Yeah. I mean, the initial assumption from law enforcement and the media was, what, a targeted attack?
Yeah.
Maybe on the family business.
Right. Or maybe something as mundane as a tragic coincidence. Faulty wiring in 2 houses from the same build or something like that. Even though these were, very high-end properties.
But as the smoke started to clear, especially at the Colts Neck mansion, the reality turned out to be so much darker.
So much darker.
It wasn't just arson. It was a quadruple homicide.
Keith, his wife Jennifer, and their 2 young children, Jesse and Sophia, were all found dead, and not from the fire. And the man who stands accused of doing all of it is the brother, Paul Caneiro.
The one whose house also mysteriously caught on fire that morning.
The very same. In this case, it has everything. You've got a high-stakes family business, a secret double life with a mistress.
You have these incredible forensic puzzles involving ballistics and DNA that are, frankly, mind-bending.
And what's really fascinating from a legal perspective is a constitutional battle over privacy that went all the way to the New Jersey State Supreme Court.
And that legal battle is crucial.
Yeah.
It is the entire reason we are doing this deep dive right now in February of 2026.
Mm-hmm.
Because this crime happened back in 2018. It has taken 7 full years to get a jury seated and to start hearing testimony.
Which is an eternity in criminal justice terms, just an absolute eternity. But that delay wasn't, just because of administrative backlog or COVID or something.
No.
It was a fundamental constitutional fight over one single piece of evidence, a DVR, a digital video recorder that was seized from a burning house.
So today, we're going to unpack all of that. We have a mountain of sources here, police reports, the actual Supreme Court ruling in State v. Caneiro, forensic accounting audits, and of course the trial transcripts that are coming out every day.
And we're going to look at the prosecution's theory, which is basically that Paul Caneiro lived this elaborate lie funded by stolen money, and when his brother found out, he killed him and his entire family to cover it up.
But we also have to dig into the defense's strategy, because it is... well, it's explosive. They aren't just saying Paul didn't do it.
No, we're pointing the finger directly
At a specific alternate suspect, the 3rd Caneiro brother, a man named Corey.
And that's the twist that just keeps coming up, the 3rd brother theory.
So the mission for this deep dive is really to examine all this evidence. Is the physical proof, the ballistics, the DNA, the financial trail, is it strong enough to overcome that reasonable doubt that the defense is trying so hard to create?
It's a huge task for the prosecution. Let's start at the beginning. Let's go to the crime scene in Colts Neck.
Okay, so Colts Neck. This is Keith Caneiro's home, and it is grim.
It's beyond grim.
Yeah.
When first responders got there, the house was just fully engulfed in flames, a total loss. But almost immediately, they found something that didn't make sense. They found Keith's body on the front lawn.
Which is the first major red flag, right? If you die in a house fire, you're almost always found inside the house.
Exactly. You don't escape a fire just to collapse on the lawn and die. And it was immediately obvious why he was out there. He had gunshot wounds.
How many?
5 of them. 3 to the head, 1 to the neck, and 1 to his lower back.
The one to the back that suggests he might have been turning away or even on the ground.
It does. This was not a panic situation. This was an execution.
Yeah.
And when the investigators started looking closer at the scene, they found a very specific detail about the house's infrastructure.
The power.
The power had been cut. And I'm not talking about a wire melting in the fire. I've read the report on the electrical panel. The main breaker was physically thrown into the off position.
And a mansion like that, I mean, it would have a backup generator, right?
Of course. And the backup generator, which should have kicked on automatically the second the power went out. It had been disabled.
So this was planned.
Oh, absolutely. The entire theory of the crime rests on this lure. The killer cuts the power, waits. Keith, inside, realizes the lights are out and the generator hasn't started. So what does he do?
He goes outside to check on it.
He goes outside to check the panel or the generator. He walks out, probably confused, maybe a little annoyed, and is met with a barrage of gunfire. It's a classic premeditated ambush.
And so, with Keith lying dead on the lawn, the killer then goes inside the house. And this is where it becomes incredibly difficult to read the reports.
Yeah. Jennifer Caneiro, Keith's wife, was found inside. She was on the stairs that were leading up from the basement.
And what were her injuries?
She had been shot once in the head and also stabbed multiple times. The sequencing is hard to be certain about, but it appears she was the next target immediately after Keith was taken down outside.
But the truly just horrifying forensic evidence relates to the children, Jesse and Sophia.
Jesse was 11 years old. Sophia was only 8.
My God.
Jesse was found in the kitchen. He had been stabbed repeatedly. But the medical examiner, Dr. Falzon, testified about something absolutely critical. He found soot in Jesse's airway.
No, which means he was still breathing.
He was breathing when the fire started.
Yeah.
If you're dead before fire is set, you don't inhale smoke. There's no respiration. Jesse had soot deep in his trachea.
So he was alive. Maybe unconscious from the stab wounds, but alive as the house burned around him.
That is what the evidence indicates, yes.
And what about his little sister, Sophia?
Sophia was found on a staircase landing. She also had been stabbed multiple times. The report notes wounds to her face, which can sometimes be indicative of defensive-type injuries or just extreme rage from the attacker.
And her toxicology report.
Her toxicology report showed a carboxyhemoglobin level, that's carbon monoxide in the blood, of 49%.
49%. That's massive.
It's lethal. But it takes time to build up to that level. It's not instantaneous. It confirms, unequivocally, that she was alive and breathing in that smoke for a significant period of time before she died.
So the killer attacks the children, leaves them for dead, and then sets the fire.
Right. The arson investigators determined the fire was set in a storage closet in the basement. They found evidence of an accelerant, probably gasoline, so the timeline becomes clear. Kill the adults, neutralize the children, and then set a massive fire to try and destroy every last bit of evidence.
It's an attempt at total erasure. Just wipe the entire family off the map.
Mm-hmm. And while all this is happening, or just before, we have to remember the other fire, the one at Paul's house in Ocean Township.
Right. At 5 in the morning, much earlier, Paul's house catches fire. He, his wife Susan, and their 2 daughters all escape unharmed.
And Paul is there on the lawn when the first responders show up, playing the part of the grieving, confused victim. My house is on fire. I don't know what happened.
The prosecution has a very different name for this. They call it a ruse.
A staged event. A piece of theater. The theory is that Paul set his own house on fire as a preemptive strike.
To create an alternate narrative.
Precisely. If both brothers are attacked on the same day, what do the police think? They look for a disgruntled employee from their tech company. They look for a business rival, maybe some kind of organized crime hit. And they don't look at the brother who just barely escaped the exact same fate as his tragically deceased sibling.
It's a masterclass in diversion. Look over there at this mysterious threat, not at me.
But this brings us to that 7-year delay. Why are we just hearing all of this in a trial now? And it all comes back to that DVR in Paul's burning house.
This is where the case gets bogged down in constitutional law for years.
Yeah, this is the legal meat of it. So police and fire arrive at Paul's house in Ocean Township. The fire is burning. It's an active scene. They eventually manage to put out the fire that's in the garage.
But the main house is still going up.
The main house is still fully involved, yes. And in that garage, which is now just smoky and water damage, they see a DVR unit hooked up to the security cameras.
And they know that could be evidence.
Critical evidence.
Yeah.
So an officer from the prosecutor's office goes into the garage without a warrant and seizes the DVR. The logic being, we have to save this before the fire from the main house spreads back to the garage or before a firefighter soaks it with a hose and destroys the data.
I mean, that sounds completely reasonable to me. You save the evidence while you can.
It sounds reasonable to a civilian and, frankly, to me. But under the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution, a warrantless search is presumptively unreasonable. It's illegal unless it falls under a very specific, well-delineated exception to the warrant rule.
And the defense pounced on that.
Immediately. Their argument was that the immediate emergency in that specific room, the garage, was over. The fire in the garage had been extinguished, therefore the police had time. They could have secured the scene, had an officer stand guard, while another officer called a judge to get a telephonic warrant.
And the original trial judge agreed with them.
The trial judge agreed with the defense. He suppressed the evidence. He said the police violated Paul Caneiro's Fourth Amendment rights. And this was a devastating blow to the prosecution.
Because what's on that DVR?
The state claims the footage is damning. They allege it shows Paul moving around outside his own home in the early morning hours, and then, crucially, disconnecting the system right before the fire starts.
So it proves the ruse.
It proves the staging. So the state couldn't let that go. They appealed the ruling.
And this crawled its way up the appellate system for years, all the way to the New Jersey Supreme Court. The case is State v. Caneiro, and it was just decided in December of 2025.
Right. And the Supreme Court, in a major ruling, reversed the lower court. They said the seizure was, in fact, legal.
Under what justification?
Under the exigent circumstances exception. They used a legal test called the Manning factors, which is a checklist of sorts that courts in New Jersey use to determine if a situation is a true emergency that justifies skipping the warrant.
Okay, so let's break that down for a second. What were the specific factors here that made the Supreme Court say, yes, this was an exigency?
Well, first and foremost was the proximity and the severity of the ongoing fire. The main house was only 60 feet away from the garage, and as the court wrote, it was still engulfed in flames.
So just because one room is safe for the moment doesn't mean the whole scene is safe.
Exactly. The court recognized that fires are dynamic and unpredictable. Second, they pointed to the chaotic nature of the scene. You had firefighters dragging high-pressure hoses, using power saws to cut holes in the roof for ventilation, spraying water and chemical foam everywhere.
It's a disaster zone, not a sterile crime scene.
It's a total disaster zone, and the court said it was reasonable for police to fear that the DVR could be inadvertently destroyed by the firefighting efforts themselves, not just by the fire.
And was there a risk of the fire spreading back?
A huge risk. The court specifically noted that there were active gas meters near the garage. There was a legitimate fear of an explosion or the fire flashing back over to the garage area. They essentially ruled that police officers do not have to stand around and draft a warrant application while a house is burning down.
The phrase they used was, time is of the essence.
That is the key phrase from the opinion. The imminent need to preserve that digital evidence from destruction outweighed the relatively minor privacy intrusion of an officer stepping into a smoke-filled garage to grab it.
And this sets a huge precedent for future cases involving digital evidence at active fire scenes.
A massive precedent. So after a 7-year fight, the DVR is in. The jury gets to see it. And that footage is now a cornerstone of the prosecution's case that the Ocean Township fire was a complete and total setup by Paul.
Okay, so we have the how, we have the murders, the fires, the alleged ruse. Let's talk about the why. Because on paper, these two brothers, Paul and Keith, they were successful business partners.
They ran a tech company called Square One. From the outside, they looked like a team. They were supposedly best friends.
So why would you wipe out your brother's entire family?
You follow the money. Or in this case, you follow the staggering lack of it.
We have the forensic accounting reports that have been entered into evidence, and Paul Caneiro was bleeding cash.
Bleeding is an understatement. He was hemorrhaging money. The audit showed that in 2017, his household expenses totaled over $402,000.
$400,000?
And in 2018, the year of the murders, in just the first 10.5 months, he had already spent another $314,000.
And what was his income? Did he have the money to cover that kind of spending?
Not even close. He was on disability after a car accident and was receiving payments of about $200,000 a year.
So he's spending double his income.
Consistently. And you have to understand, we aren't talking about, catastrophic medical bills or some run of bad luck. We are talking about pure lifestyle spending.
I'm looking at the list of expenditures from the trial exhibit. It's absurd. 3 leased Porsches.
Three Porsches, a $47,000 Jeep Wrangler, and just a massive credit card debt. He made payments of $143,000 to one American Express card in a single year.
And then there's the woman.
Yes. The most scandalous part of the spending involves a woman named Yisel Restrepo,
Who was described in court as his friend.
She testified through an interpreter that they were best friends, but when you look at the receipts, it's clear she was his mistress. Paul was leasing an Audi SUV for her.
He paid for her trips.
Paid for her trips to Colombia, to Las Vegas, to Boston. He even paid for her daughter's college application fees.
So he's living this complete double life. He's the suburban family man in Ocean Township, and at the same time, he's a globe-trotting sugar daddy to a mistress, all while driving Porsches he absolutely cannot afford.
And to keep this entire house of cards from collapsing, the prosecution says he started stealing.
From his own family.
From the most vulnerable members of his family. Paul was the trustee for the trust fund set up for Keith's children, for Jesse and Sophia.
And Detective Bassner testified that he found irregularities.
To put it mildly, the detective's testimony revealed that Paul had systematically drained roughly $78,000 from that trust.
He was stealing from his own niece and nephew, the same children who were later found stabbed and left to die in a fire.
Yes. And according to the prosecution, this theft is the trigger event. This is what sets the entire massacre in motion, because Keith Caneiro found out, or at least he realized something was very wrong.
And the prosecution has the proof. They played a voicemail in court from the night before the murders, November 19th, 2018.
It's Keith's voice. And he is furious. He had been trying to access the trust account and realized he was locked out.
I have the transcript of that call right here. Keith says, "I need it. Give me the effing login, Paul."
There's no ambiguity there. He knows Paul is controlling the account and he wants in, and then he sets a deadline.
He tells Paul, "I want that login by 8:00 p.m.
8:00 p.m. I mean, can you imagine being Paul in that moment? The sheer panic, the walls are closing in. He knows the $78,000 is gone.
If he gives Keith the login, it's over.
It's all over. Keith sees the theft. The business partnership blows up. The fraud is exposed to the whole family. The Porsches get repossessed. The mistress finds out he's a broke fraud. He probably goes to jail. His entire world evaporates.
So the 8:00 p.m. deadline passes, and just a few hours later, in the dead of night, the prosecution says Paul drove to Colts Neck.
But they argue it wasn't just about hiding the $78,000 theft. It was about solving his entire financial catastrophe in one single monstrous act.
The life insurance.
The life insurance policy on Keith.
How much was it worth?
$3 million.
A huge sum of money.
But, and this is absolutely critical to understanding the motive, you have to look at the beneficiaries. The primary beneficiary of that $3 million policy was Keith's wife, Jennifer. And the secondary beneficiaries were his children, Jesse and Sophia.
So if just Keith dies, Jennifer gets the $3 million, Paul gets nothing, his problem isn't solved.
Correct. Paul gets absolutely nothing, unless
Jennifer and the children are also dead.
Exactly. The policy had a contingent beneficiary clause. If the primary and secondary beneficiaries were all deceased, the payout would then go to the next of kin. In this case, Keith's surviving brothers.
Brothers, plural.
Yes. The payout would be split evenly between Paul Caneiro and Corey Caneiro.
So Paul stood to gain $1.5 million.
And Corey stood to gain $1.5 million. And this is where we have to pause and plant that flag for the defense's theory, because the defense looks at that exact same insurance policy and says, wait a minute, Paul wasn't the only brother with a multi-million-dollar motive here.
Right. This is the seed of their whole third brother theory. They argue that Corey Caneiro stood to gain the exact same amount of money from the complete annihilation of Keith's family.
And they have made claims in court that Corey's finances were actually in worse shape than Paul's.
Okay, so we'll definitely get deeper into that whole defense strategy later, but it's important for you to know that this motive, this insurance money, it cuts both ways.
It absolutely does. But let's get back to the physical evidence linking Paul to the scene. Because motive is one thing. Pulling the trigger and wielding a knife is something else entirely. And the ballistics evidence in this case is, well, it's incredibly specific.
This is where that tunnel vision argument from the defense starts to run into some serious problems.
A huge problem. So Detective Sergeant Chris Clayton from the New Jersey State Police Ballistics Unit testified. He gave the jury a masterclass in forensic firearm identification, explaining the concept of lands and grooves.
Which, for anyone listening who doesn't know, that's the rifling inside a gun barrel, correct? That's what makes the bullet spin.
Precisely. When a barrel is manufactured, a machine cuts these spiral grooves inside it, and that cutting process leaves microscopic scratches and imperfection striations. As the bullet is forced down the barrel, these striations are imprinted onto the soft metal of the bullet. It's a mechanical fingerprint.
And the idea is that no two gun barrels are exactly alike.
That's the bedrock of ballistics. The marks are unique. So they recovered bullets from Keith's body and cartridge casings from the lawn. They needed to match them to a gun.
And did they?
They matched them to a barrel. And this is where the case gets really technical and really damning for Paul Caneiro. They didn't just find a gun lying next to the body. What they found was a specific loose gun barrel in the back of Paul Caneiro's Porsche Macan.
Wait, hold on. Just the barrel, not the entire firearm.
Just the barrel. It was wrapped in something, I believe, and tucked away in the cargo area. And it wasn't a standard barrel. It was a threaded barrel.
Meaning it had screw threads on the tip.
Right, which are almost exclusively there for one reason: to attach a silencer, or more accurately, a sound suppressor.
So Paul has a silencer-ready barrel just sitting in the trunk of his Porsche on the day his brother is shot to death.
Yes. And back at Paul's house, in his basement, police found a handgun, a 6 Hour P229.
So what did the ballistics experts do?
They took that threaded barrel from the car, they inserted it into the 6 Hour handgun from the basement, and they test-fired it in their lab. And the striations on their test-fired bullet were a perfect match to the striations on the bullets that killed Keith Caneiro.
Wow, that is astonishingly specific.
It is.
I mean, that implies he swapped the barrel out of his gun, either to hide the match, or maybe because he actually used a silencer during the crime and then took the barrel off as part of dismantling the whole setup.
It implies a huge amount of premeditation and forensic awareness. He's trying to cover his tracks. If the police had just found the Sig Sauer with its standard factory barrel in it and test-fired it, it wouldn't have matched. They needed that specific threaded barrel from the Porsche to make the connection.
What about the ammunition?
Also a match. The cartridge casings found at the murder scene were a specific brand, Fiocchi, with a head stamp that read 10 GFL 10. Police found a box of that exact same ammunition in Paul's house.
So the weapon is tied directly to Paul's car and his house. Now, what about the killer's presence at the scene? You mentioned DNA earlier. This feels like the other half of the forensic puzzle.
It is. And this brings us to what the prosecution calls the plastic container. In Paul's basement, amidst all the debris from the fire he allegedly set, investigators found a plastic storage tub.
And inside?
Inside were clothes, specifically a pair of jeans.
Why were they in a tub?
The prosecution's theory is that they were put there to be hidden or moved. But then the fire happened, and the firefighters came in with hoses and foam. Everything got soaked, and because it was late November in New Jersey, it then froze. So these jeans were essentially preserved inside this plastic tub in a block of ice and debris.
And they were able to get a DNA sample from them.
Oh, yes. The crime lab went to work on those jeans, and they didn't just find Paul's DNA, which you'd expect. They found a mixture of DNA profiles.
And who else was in the mix?
They used a very advanced software called STRmix. It's a probabilistic genotyping software that's designed to deconvolute complex DNA mixtures from multiple contributors. And the software identified the DNA of Jesse and Sophia Caneiro on those genes.
The children.
The children's DNA was on their Uncle Paul's genes, which were found hidden in his basement after the murders. The statistical analysis showed that the odds of it being a random match, of it being someone other than the children, were 1 in quintillions. It was them.
Okay, so Paul's genes, found in Paul's basement, have the DNA of his murdered niece and nephew on them. How does the defense even begin to explain that?
Well, the standard defense for this is always transfer DNA. You know, he's their uncle. He hugged them at a family gathering a week before. Of course, his DNA is on them and theirs is on him.
But the prosecution would argue the context here is key.
The context is everything. They would argue the quantity and location of the DNA is more consistent with close physical contact during a violent assault, not a casual family hug from last Thanksgiving.
And there was also the canine testimony, the dog, right?
Yes. Canine Creed. Sergeant Matthew Cocking testified about his partner. And Creed is a very special kind of dog. He's a cadaver dog.
Meaning he's not trained to smell drugs or bombs.
He's trained to detect one thing and one thing only: the specific odor of decomposing human remains.
So not just blood, the smell of death, basically.
That's a good way to put it. He's trained to alert on the specific chemical compounds that are released during decomposition. And Creed alerted to 2 very significant spots.
Where?
First, he alerted to the cargo area of the Porsche Macan, the exact same area where that threaded murder barrel was found.
And the second spot?
He alerted to that pile of debris in the basement, specifically to the plastic container that held the jeans with the children's DNA on them.
So the dog smells death in Paul's car and on Paul's clothes?
Precisely. Now, the defense did their best on cross-examination. They got the handler, Sergeant Cocking, to admit that odor can be transferred. So if Paul, say, touched a body and then touched the trunk of his car, the odor could transfer. But that doesn't really help Paul's case.
No, it still places him in direct contact with a dead body.
It just changes the mechanism of transfer. It doesn't change the conclusion. The smell of death links Paul's car and Paul's clothes to the victims.
I want to pivot back to that double life aspect for a moment because the testimony of the mistress, Yezel Restrepo, was absolutely fascinating.
It really was a window into Paul's psyche. She had to testify through a Spanish interpreter, and she just painted this picture of a man who was completely different from the one the prosecution described.
She called him her best friend.
Her best friend. She said he was very smart, very supportive, always there for her and her daughter. This, while he is allegedly stealing from his family and plotting to murder them.
It just shows the level of compartmentalization he must have been capable of.
It's astounding. And her testimony also corroborated a key part of the state's case, Paul's familiarity with guns. She testified that they went to shooting ranges together several times. She saw him handling firearms. She knew he was comfortable with them.
But she had no idea about the financial trouble.
None whatsoever. To her, the illusion was perfect. He was this wealthy, successful businessman who could afford to lease her an Audi and fly her to Las Vegas. She saw the benefactor. Keith, on the other hand, was starting to see the thief.
It's just a classic narcissistic profile. Maintain the image, the facade at all costs, even if the foundation is crumbling.
And when the facade is threatened, the rage comes out.
Okay, but let's give the defense their due here.
Yeah.
Because despite the barrel and the DNA and the voicemail, they are fighting this case tooth and nail. And they're leaning almost entirely on this tunnel vision argument.
Right. The lead defense attorney is Monica Mastalone. And from her opening statement, her argument has been clear. The police arrived at that second fire, they saw Paul Caneiro, and they decided right then and there, he's the guy.
And from that moment on, she argues, they stopped being objective investigators.
Exactly. She claims they worked backward from their conclusion, trying to make all the evidence fit Paul, while ignoring any evidence that might have pointed in another direction.
And that other direction is Corey.
The third brother. The entire defense strategy revolves around creating reasonable doubt by pointing the finger at Corey. They start with the insurance policy.
The $1.5 million motive.
The exact same financial motive that Paul had. And they've tried to tell the jury that Corey's finances were actually in worse shape than Paul's, though they haven't been able to present the same level of detailed forensic accounting to back that up yet.
But their main point isn't just motive, it's procedure. It's about what the police didn't do.
Yes, they hammer this point home every chance they get. They claim police never searched Corey's house.
Is that true? Based on the testimony so far?
Based on the testimony, yes, that appears to be true. There was no search warrant ever executed on Corey Caneiro's home or property.
And they didn't get his DNA.
Police never took a DNA swab from Corey for comparison. They never subpoenaed his phone records to check his location data. They never pulled surveillance footage from his neighborhood to verify his alibi for the morning of the murders.
In a quadruple homicide, where the brother is a potential beneficiary of a huge insurance policy, that does seem like an oversight.
It does. Now, the police have an answer for this. Lieutenant Patrick Petrucciello testified, and he was very direct. He said, Corey Caneiro was never a suspect. The evidence always led us to Paul.
Their argument is, why would you go search a random brother's house when you have the murder weapons barrel in Paul's car and the victim's DNA on jeans in Paul's basement?
Right. You follow the physical evidence. You don't just go investigate every family member with a potential financial motive if there's no physical evidence pointing to them.
But the defense is using that lack of a DNA sample from Corey against the state.
And it's a very clever legal strategy. They are arguing to the jury, you found a DNA mixture on those jeans that the state's expert says belongs to the children. But Paul and Corey are full biological brothers. They share a significant amount of their DNA.
They're trying to use that familial link to muddy the waters.
Precisely. They're saying, without Corey's DNA profile to definitively exclude him as a contributor to that mixture, how can you be 100% certain that the male DNA on those genes didn't come from Corey, the other uncle?
It could have been the other uncle.
That's the doubt they're trying to plant. And with the barrel in the car, they're just arguing that anyone could have planted it there if the car was unlocked or if Corey somehow had a key.
But that's a much bigger leap. Did Corey have access to Paul's locked Porsche? Did Corey have access to Paul's basement to hide the jeans in that specific container? Did Corey have the expertise to set the fire at Paul's house, to frame him and then escape without anyone seeing him.
That is the enormous hurdle for the defense. The frame job defense is always incredibly difficult to sell to a jury when the physical evidence is this granular and this interconnected.
It's one thing to say someone planted a gun on you. It's another thing entirely to say someone planted a very specific aftermarket threaded barrel that just happens to perfectly match the microscopic striations on bullets found inside your murdered brother's body.
The level of sophistication and planning required for a frame job like that is almost impossible.
So as we sit here in February 2026, the trial is still going on. What's the atmosphere like in that courtroom?
From all reports, it is incredibly heavy, incredibly tense. Observers have reported that Paul Caneiro himself has been very emotional during testimony.
Crying.
Yes, he's been seen crying, wiping his eyes with tissues, particularly during the medical examiner's testimony about the autopsies of his niece and nephew.
And the eternal question is he crying for them or is he crying for himself?
That is the million-dollar question that the jury has to answer. Is this the genuine grief of an innocent uncle who has lost his entire family in a horrific crime? Or is it the performative guilt of a man who is being forced to confront the absolute horror of what he did?
And the judge, Judge Lemieux, seems to be keeping a very tight leash on the proceedings.
A very tight leash. There have been numerous sidebars and admonishments, especially when the defense tries to venture too far into Corey's alleged financial history without laying a proper foundation. The prosecution objects, and the judge has to rein them in. It's a constant battle over what the jury is allowed to hear.
It really does sound like the prosecution's central narrative is this house of cards theory.
It's the most compelling because it explains the timing perfectly. That $78,000 he stole from the trust. In the grand scheme of their tech business, it's not a fortune. But the exposure of that theft was the one thing that would have toppled all the dominoes.
And that voicemail from Keith set a literal clock on his own life.
He had no idea. He thought he was just being a tough businessman, demanding accountability from his brother and business partner. He gave him a deadline, 8:00 p.m. He didn't know he was backing a desperate and narcissistic man into a lethal corner.
It's just haunting to think about. A dispute over a password, over a trust fund login, escalating into a family annihilation.
That's the core tragedy of this case.
So what's next in the trial? What can we expect to see in the coming weeks?
Well, the prosecution has rested its case. The defense is now presenting their case in chief. The big question on everyone's mind is whether they will actually call Corey Caneiro to the stand.
And put him under oath.
Put him under oath and cross-examine him about his finances, about his alibi, about his relationship with Keith. That will be the absolute moment of the trial if it happens. Can they crack him? Can they convince the jury that he's the real killer?
Or will the sheer weight of the physical evidence, the barrel, the jeans, the dog, the DNA be a wall that they just can't break through?
If I had to guess, I'd say that Supreme Court ruling on the Manning factors was the real turning point of this whole case. Once that DVR footage was allowed in, the footage that allegedly shows Paul staging the fire at his own house, it makes the frame job theory so much harder to sell.
Because if Paul set his own fire, he's not a victim.
He's not a victim. And if he's not a victim, the entire defense narrative just collapses under its own weight.
So we're left with this final thought, and it's something the defense brought up, the concept of the presumption of innocence. Even with all this evidence, he is innocent until proven guilty. But it makes you wonder, if the DNA and the ballistics are so damning, why does the defense feel confident enough to point the finger so directly at the surviving brother?
It's an act of desperation, perhaps. Or maybe they believe they can create just enough confusion, just enough doubt about the police investigation to hang a jury. They don't need to prove Corey did it. They just need one juror to think, well, maybe.
It's an incredible legal tightrope to walk. We will be watching the trial feeds very closely as the defense presents its case. This is one of those cases where every day brings a new piece of a very dark and complicated puzzle.
Absolutely. And for any of you listening who are interested in the legal side, I really do recommend reading the State v. Caneiro Supreme Court opinion. It's a truly fascinating look at how our Fourth Amendment privacy rights are evolving in the face of modern technology and emergency situations.
We'll make sure to link that in the show notes. That's going to do it for this deep dive into the Caneiro family massacre. It's a very heavy one, but it's so important to understand how these complex investigations actually work, beyond the simple headlines.
It really is. Stay safe, everyone.